It was 1928 when my father bought my sister and I one of these sports cycles. He bought me this new bike, similar to those that were used by tourers. Not exactly low handlebars, but they were just slightly lowered and fairly wide. They were only one gear. Gosh, you didn't have the 5, 10, 15 gears that they have today, just the one gear. And my brother had already joined the cyclist touring club with his girlfriend. They had a tandem, and we decided to join as well. And we used to meet the club at a certain place on a Saturday afternoon, round about 2 o'clock, and then we'd all go off together, the whole of the cycling club. There were very little motor traffic in those days, very little. You could go for miles and never see a motor car. But we used to ride 2 abreast. And if there was a car or anything coming, those at the back would shout, "Line up," and you'd get into single file immediately. There might be 20 or 25 in the party, and we'd go out to places like Henley in Arden, Aston Cantlow. We always went and saw something quite interesting. The Cyclist Touring Club had CTC houses here and there and everywhere. They'd got a handbook full of addresses where you could go at any time and ask for tea, and they'd provide tea for you, or you could spend a night. And we'd get to the CTC house and all put your bicycles in the garden or whatever, and then we'd go inside for the tea. Now the table was always laid with a nice white cloth, and in the middle of the table would be a bowl of lettuce or watercress. There'd be 2 or 3 dishes with different sorts of jam in, and a great big plate full of bread and butter. According to the number of people there might be 2 or 3 number of people who were going. And then plenty of tea and milk. You could have as many cups of tea as you liked. And the charge for that was called a plain tea. And the charge for that was 8 pence. And that was plenty, really. I mean, if we'd had our dinner at home, we didn't really need a great big tea. The majority of the cakes they'd provide you with a big cake in the middle of the table, and the majority of them were homemade. Now, if you had bed and breakfast, if you were at a place like, we used to stay at a place in Loughborough, in the Cotswolds, and there'd perhaps be 20 people there having breakfast, and they'd bring in huge dishes of bacon floating in the fat, and the boys would have 2 and 3 eggs each. It was terrific feeding that we had, really. But they were marvellous days, and I had a friend called Minnie. I was Winnie and she was Minnie. Win and Min. We decided that we'd go on holiday together, and we sent to the Cyclist Touring Club for a tour, which they would send you where to go and where to call, and you'd got the handbook. You could decide where you were going to stay the different nights and everything. You didn't have to book. You could just go offhand. We decided that we'd tour Wales, and we cycled as far as Rhayader from Birmingham, and we put up the night there. We had a marvellous holiday, really. We used to have bed and breakfast, and then we'd buy rolls or sandwiches and have a midday picnic, and then find a place for supper, bed and breakfast. One day we went, I think it was the Dovey Valley, we were coming down, and we got to the coast and we were going to have a picnic on the beach. And when we got there, it was wet. The tide had been in and there wasn't anywhere to sit. So we said, well, let's walk along and see if we can find somewhere. So we walked along this beach. It was a cliff up. And we came to an opening, and there was a notice, and it said, "To the gardens." So we said, well, that sounds wonderful. Let's climb up here. And when we got to the top, We stood there in absolute amazement, both of us. The sight that met our gaze was absolutely wonderful. The garden, of course it was early spring, the beginning of June, and all the flowering shrubs were out, and all round this garden there was flowers. The flower beds were massed with flowers. It was the most beautiful sight you could ever see, and quite unexpected. And right out into the distance you could see all the Snowdonia range of mountains in the distance over the top of the gardens there. Oh, it was beautiful. And we turned round, and the other side, of course, was the sea, and there was a boat going across, a steamer going across the water. And we stood there for a few minutes, really, gazing at all this lovely beauty. And we sat down, and we got the picnic out, and we had our picnic. Min got up, and after we'd finished, and she looked about her, and she said, "Do you know, Win, I think this is the most beautiful place I've ever been in all my life." So I said, "It is to me as well. It's all the way across these. You couldn't hear anybody speak. You couldn't see anybody at all. Nor on the beach. Nobody. Just us two there in these gardens." And Min said, "I don't know," she said, "I feel as if I'd love to sing." So I said, "Oh, yes, let's, Min." So she said, "What shall we sing?" And I said, "I know. Praise my soul, the King of Heaven." So we stood there and we sang "Praise my soul, the King of Heaven" at the top of our voices. And as we started, we just couldn't believe it, because our voices echoed. It was "Praise my, praise my, praise my, praise my, praise my, praise," and it went on and on, not only twice or three times, but right into the distance. And we looked at each other, but we went on singing, you see, and she was going like this, and I remember we went through all the verses, and it was as if multitudes of people were singing, one after the other, it went right across to the mountain, echoing back and back, and we just couldn't believe the sound, because as there were only two of us, but it sounded as if there were thousands singing because of the echoes. And when we'd finished, she said, "Oh, wasn't that wonderful?" I said, "Oh, didn't imagine it would be anything like that, did you?" And she said, "No, I didn't." She said, "What a pity there wasn't somebody here to hear us." So I said, "Don't worry, Min, God was here." She said He was here before we started to sing. But that's how we were in those days. But as long as we lived, she and I have always remembered that morning up on that mountainside, a hillside. She's been dead now some 10, 15 years, I should think. But I wrote to her husband, he wrote to tell me that she died, and I wrote back and I told him how I always thought of Min every time I heard "Praise my soul, the King of Heaven" on the radio or anywhere. And because I have songs of praise on a Sunday night, and she used to have it on as well. And he said she was exactly the same. She'd say, "Oh, here's the song." I always remember the singing it to the mountains and echoing back and back and back. It was really wonderful.